Welcome to Techzine on Tour. We're here with another guest. We are delighted to have our new guest. It is O'Farrell. He's the CTO at VMware and he is the Vice President of IoT at Dell Technologies. We're going to talk a lot today about VMware.
Okay. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Let's start with VMware. You've been there for years now.
Yes.
How is VMware performing the last couple of years?
Yeah, the last year in particular has been a powerful year for VMware. Like if you just look at the financials, we're just coming off the end of our financial year. Our financial year actually ends a little bit into the new year. It doesn't track the calendar year exactly. And this year we're finishing off with, global revenue of something like 8.97, something like that, $1 billion. And that's, that's about 14% over what the previous year was. So good growth, good numbers. And what's most interesting about that is, you're a little bit familiar with VMware, so we've got a lot of products, right? And some of them are relatively new products, and that performance is pretty strong across all of the different products. So I would say things are looking pretty good for us right now. Our strategy, which has really emphasized the concept of hybrid cloud and how do people embrace cloud, but in a way which is pragmatic about how they're going to leverage on-prem, off-prem, even telco and edge. It's working very well for us.
Okay. The last 2 years, VMware has been a part of the Dell Technologies family.
Yeah.
Did that encourage it to grow or make it faster?
Yeah. It's probably worth going through that story a little bit because a lot of people ask about that and how does that occur and so on, since VMware is a public company. VMware was originally bought by EMC when it was a independent private company. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of EMC. And a few years into that, EMC then brought VMware public with about roughly 20% of the shares were put out onto the market. So EMC effectively owned 80%. The numbers vary a little between 80, 81 and so on. And then Dell Technologies bought EMC roughly 2 years ago. And as a side effect of that, then VMware became part of Dell Technologies. And it's been a very good relationship for us because, we're very much a pure software company. We focus on the essence of how are you going to use enterprise software and virtualization at its core and management of infrastructure. Even though we use the word infrastructure a lot, it's all around how do I represent that infrastructure from a software point of view. Now we have this relationship with one of the largest server companies out there, and also who's got a lot of presence on end user desktops and so on. So it allows us to be able to build some synergies across those. And it has been an accelerator for us, particularly when you begin to look at products like VxRail, where we've had some partnership with Dell on, and also just how do we work with and leverage some of the global channels that Dell has. It's been a good relationship. I personally are quite involved with that relationship because we want to make sure that when there are interactions going on across the two companies, from a technical point of view, it's well coordinated. You have these two large separate companies. Obviously, Dell is much larger than VMware, but you want to make sure that you're able to synchronize those and so on. And one of the things that my team focuses on is helping make sure that those synergies are real and how do we leverage them across different parts of the company.
If we talk about that partnership, Dell is a big vendor with a few large competitors.
Correct.
And those competitors also rely on VMware
Correct.
For a part.
Yes.
Did the perception of those partners change when you were bought by Dell Technologies?
If you're a partner and you're competing with Dell and then you're looking at the scope of Dell and the relationship with VMware, I think initially it triggers some questions. But in practice, those questions showed up as well when EMC bought VMware. And, we place great value on making sure that our ecosystem is strong. And so we place enormous value in trying to make sure, even as we would build synergies with Dell, that we continue to have strong relationships with those other server vendors, with those storage vendors, which are also part of that broad ecosystem. And interestingly enough, Dell is pretty supportive of that. We don't get into situations where we're, dealing with a conflict in some way around that. The bottom line is one of the strengths that VMware has, its ability to work across a broad ecosystem. It has always been the case. And, we intend continuing to do that. Dell is supportive of that. And I think, the two things aren't mutually exclusive, our ability to work with Dell and our ability to work broadly across the industry. And, we're going to continue to focus on that. Actually, and this is a little bit in the past, I guess, when EMC bought VMware, I used to run the storage teams at VMware at that point, right? And, our big partners were, back then, IBM Storage and Hitachi Storage, all these large storage companies. And so there was definitely a concern that, I guess we're only doing EMC storage now. But in practice, if I look back over that time, we spent as much focus, if not more, on making sure that the rest of the storage ecosystem was supported as well. And so it's the same as happening at this stage. I cannot overemphasize the point. The ecosystem, because of our key role in the private data center and then how that branches into the public cloud, that ecosystem is just very important to us.
Okay. Talking a bit about competition, we recently had the same interview with Diwar Pandey,
yes,
the CEO of Nutanix. The last few years, Nutanix gained a lot of market share in the virtualization market. I think they're really competing with you on different levels. How do you see Nutanix? Do you see them as a competitor or?
Right. It's easy to get into a little bit of a kind of a heated discussion around Nutanix and VMware. We've seen some of that going on, right? I do not go there. I look at it from the point of view of VMware's primary role is to deliver solutions and solve problems for our customers. That's what we have continued to do. That's what we focus our innovation on. That's what we're seeing in terms of the market success that we are seeing. And so that's the focus that I have on that. What can we do to deliver hyperconverged infrastructure in this particular case, which directly solves those problems? And, if we get feedback from customers saying, hey, move in another direction because there's a new opportunity over here, how quickly can we react and do that? So it's a hardcore focus on that. And from a competitive point of view, VMware, if I just look at vSAN, which is the storage component in all of this, last year we spoke of VMware having a little over 17,000 customers on that space. And that's last year, and we're rapidly growing, so those numbers are larger at this stage, which is quite a bit larger than the competition that's in that space, including Nutanix. And you look at some of the awards, CRN, even Intel speaking about VMware as a partner on the HCI space. Over and over again, we are being seen as this HCI leader. And a lot of that is coming from the fact that, one, we focus our innovation on that, directly making new products, new features that will be able to solve those problems. But also, to us, HCI or vSAN from a storage point of view are actually not isolated products. They're part of a much broader component around how are you going to bridge this whole story of private cloud and public cloud together, the hybrid cloud. And so there's a lot of those components that end up feeding across that story. So when you look at VMware, you see a very comprehensive solution. Yes, can we do storage for you with vSAN? Yes, we can. Does that storage need to be uniquely connected into a public cloud in some way? Yes, we can with NSX. Do you want to be able to say, how do I manage that infrastructure between, we say, a VMC on AWS, that's our VMware solution on Amazon, and your on-prem infrastructure, potentially using VxRail? All of those things we can stitch together. So from a competitive point of view, my view is we've got the most comprehensive solution when it comes to how do you build true pragmatic enterprise, solve real problems in the real world of where I'm trying to deal with the journey to the cloud and at the same time deal with my existing applications.
I think no one will challenge you that you have the largest market share and you're very dominant and innovating. But I do think a rising star as Nutanix, I think that's a relative good term for them. They do challenge you and they also grow pretty fast. Are you more on your toes? Are you more watching what they're moving and what you can do or learn from them to improve your own product, for example?
Nutanix has recently moved into producing things like hypervisors and software-defined networking, right? So when you say what we can learn from them, we are the leaders in anything got to do with x86 hypervisors. We are the leaders in software-defined networking. So far from following under those circumstances, I think they are looking to the directions we are pushing in and figure how they can produce products in that space in some way. When you say, are we on our toes or are we watching that in some way? You cannot, as a software company or as an innovative company, you cannot have the hubris to pretend that the rest of the industry is not making moves, right? But that is not in any way a sense of fear or a sense of we need to react to this in some way. We're very focused. We always go back to the key question of how do we use innovation to solve a hardcore customer problem. If we can do that, it has always worked for us, and it's obviously working for us in the current HCI space as well.
Okay. If we move a bit to multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, as you just mentioned, VMware is very large with the on-premise part, and in the cloud you're working towards that for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
You have a very nice partnership with AWS.
Yeah.
You have a partnership with IBM.
Yeah.
But in the end, the enterprise likes more choices.
Yes.
So can we expect more on that? Are you going to look at more clouds, or more public clouds to support, maybe Azure, Google Cloud, or making a bigger choice for them? Because
our stated directional roadmap is multi-cloud. And in fact, you mentioned IBM, but there's actually lots of others. There's OVH, there's a whole bunch of clouds in that space. In fact, if you look at our VCPP program, which is the program we have for working with many of those cloud vendors, there's nearly 3,000 cloud providers in there. Now, obviously, many of those are way smaller than an Amazon or an IBM, right? And I think the relationship with Amazon is the one that most people speak about. And they speak about it for two reasons. One, I think it was a little bit surprising that we were able to bring that together, and both that Amazon and VMware were able to work together to do that, and in a very successful fashion. And so I think that's working very well for us. The second part of it is, unlike the other cloud interactions that we've done, that is a situation where VMware manages the infrastructure. So if I look at IBM, they leverage VMware technology, but they manage their infrastructure and deliver to their customers. In the case of with Amazon, we VMware offer that as a service and manage that. And that shift is an important shift because it speaks to this emerging way of delivering cloud in a very different fashion. In some ways, it's actually somebody described it yesterday. It's a little bit like Airbnb, where we don't actually own those cloud infrastructure, but we make sure you get what you need. We deliver the services, the quality, and so on associated with that. Now, to the core of your question about other cloud providers, we will continue to work with the across-the-board cloud providers, and by the way, not just the ones you've mentioned, but also cloud providers in Asia and China as well, to be able to figure out what is the best way you can deliver the same services with them. To date, the only of the top three major cloud providers that we offer an equivalent of VMC on AWS, equivalent of VMC is on AWS. However, we have technologies like Cloud Health, which allow you to look across multiple clouds, including Azure, including Amazon, and give you a unified management story across that. And so even though you do not necessarily have products the exact same as VMC and AWS, more and more we are delivering you a unified cloud experience.
How hard is it to add new clouds? Because I believe you're running on bare metal servers at AWS, but are those the normal bare metal servers, or did you optimize them a bit so they work better for the VMware software stack?
I won't get into the details of changes that or work that may have been done with AWS, except to say that we worked very closely with them and them with us. In the end, the basic concept of it's x86 servers, it's got a lot of flash storage in there to support. By the way, one comment, just as you said that, the earlier example that we made around vSAN. When you're actually on VMC on AWS, you're actually running vSAN. It's the exact same software over there. So you got that synergy going across. So we get to leverage most of our software essentially unchanged. There are some minor changes around just how we configure networking and so on. But where most of the work actually is because we offer this as a service, we need to make sure that we're delivering such a service to our customer integrated well with everything that's going on Amazon. So there's the preparation and building of that. People can easily onboard, people can scale up and down quickly, people can get information quickly around what they're using and not using. All of that was where a lot of the development focus actually went. And that, broadly speaking, is a universal service, even to the point a universal approach to the software, I should say, even to the point that you may have heard of another product called Dimension, which allows us, it's not yet released, but it is announced, which allows us to manage infrastructure on your on-premise infrastructure. It essentially uses much of that same software which we develop on Amazon to reach into your data center and give you some of the same management paradigms. So a lot of that is heavily reusable. So, until we would go to another cloud and interact closely with them, it's hard for me to answer the question specifically. But in the end, these are fairly typical large x86 servers, and we know how to write software and get it running on x86 servers.
Okay, but basically, if you would add new clouds, it would always be that it needs to work with your current clusters. You should always extend to a new cloud. It will always integrate with what you have already, and if it's on Amazon or if it's on-prem.
Yeah. When you say needs to, actually the better way I would look at that seems to be what customers are demanding. Yeah. Because one of the things that customers are looking for is they're dealing with a challenge. They want to be able to say, I want to be able to leverage the public cloud, but I've got a lot of familiarity with the infrastructure that I have right now. They also are a little bit nervous in some ways about, well, this is new, this is different. I'm not quite clear what's going to happen in this space. So a lot of what we are giving them is the flexibility of saying, we can give you a journey to the cloud. You might never actually decide to fully go to the cloud. In fact, we think most companies will settle into a kind of a hybrid fashion of a mixture of on-prem and off-prem. But what we do is give you the flexibility. You can take your existing applications. You can begin to migrate them. You can decide, hey, I don't want to do that anymore. And it's relatively easy to migrate back because in the end, it is the same infrastructure on both sides of that. So that is not a technical requirement on our part. We're responding to a customer demand for that.
Okay. If we look at multi-cloud, you also released a number of Kubernetes features and solutions. How important do you think it will be in the future? Do you think that most VMs in the end will be replaced by Kubernetes containers, or what's your vision on that?
Our vision is an and vision, VMs and containers. In fact, it's if you look at where containers run today, the vast majority of containers will run in virtual machines. Every time you fire up a bunch of containers on Amazon or Azure or Google, you're running in virtual machines. And there are reasons for that. Some of them got to do with, how do you begin to relate to the underlying physical infrastructure, but also reasons got to do with security, how do I connect networking to this, and so on. So we think it's going to be the combination of the two. What's interesting, though, is the developers themselves, to the largest degree possible, they would like to focus just on their Kubernetes and their container view of the world. And they would hope that the infrastructure provider somehow takes care of the mapping and the resolution of how do I get the network, how do I get the storage correctly associated with this containerized story. So that has been our focus. And the primary example of that is the products that we have, the PKS products, which basically are containers, containerized products, which we develop in cooperation with Pivotal, which is a sister company of VMware. And now recently, because we acquired Heptio, beginning to bring Heptio into that space. If you're not familiar with Heptio, that's a company for which the founders were two of the original founders who at Google built the original Kubernetes. And that's now part of VMware. We think Kubernetes is going to be a key and important story for software application development moving forward. We want to make sure that we are very much being able to deliver solutions in that space, and that's what we're focused on. And one of the key things there is we recognize the fact that the vast majority of our customers are enterprises, like it's hospitals, it's governments, it's banks, right? they need to know that even when I'm leveraging these new technologies like Kubernetes, I want to be able to give freedom to the developers. They want to be able to know that they also have the, what I would call like the pragmatic enterprise support underneath that to be able to keep that secure and make sure all of that holds together well from an enterprise point of view. And so that's our unique, I think, story there, to be able to say we can deliver the type of solution where the developers get the freedom to do what they need to do with Kubernetes, but this is based on a solid enterprise class platform.
I talked to one of your Dutch colleagues about Heptio during VMworld Barcelona.
Yeah.
That's almost a half a year ago.
Yes,
now you have those two that worked at Google at Kubernetes. Do you see an increasement in development, and can you create more unique features for Kubernetes to make a different point in the market than others, or differentiate maybe?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, one of the key things when you look at Heptio, or when you look at companies like that, right? They have some unique strengths just by the nature of the fact of what that company is. It's coming from a kind of a born in the cloud era. It's very much a developer-focused organization. And one of the things that VMware is particularly focused on when it makes acquisitions like that is to say, how do I make sure not to damage the very golden story that made me say this was an attractive company for us to be able to partner with or to acquire? And so there's been a lot of focus on making sure that we handle those type of transitions very carefully. So even as you say, what can we do to grow this more, or add new features, new products in that mix? We also place great care to make sure that the open source core, community-based aspect of Kubernetes and what Heptio is doing is not lost. And so we put quite a bit of focus on that. We've actually built an organization where we leverage Kubernetes and some of our existing cloud native development that we had going on before Heptio, and built that into a single organization. So you've got this nice combination of the two, but very much maintaining that open source and community focus. VMware has been doing a lot actually in open source recently, and we think that is a key part of the future developer story and the future innovation story, where open source is very good to kick off and start some of these key innovations, and we want to be part of that. We want to be able to contribute to that.
Is there a shift in strategy that you're working now more on open source?
I think I wouldn't describe it as a shift in strategy per se. I think it's as we've moved up the stack a little bit and began to more work with developers, application developers. They are leveraging, demanding the ability to leverage open source more and more. So that has pulled us into that as well. The one area where you might look at it as a bit of a shift in strategy, or at least a specific action that we took, we actually created a specific group called, it's OSPO, it's our Open Source Program Office, which we created about 2 years ago. And we've hired into that some key leaders in the open source community. We use that to contribute back into different open source projects, even ones that we're not necessarily using, but being able to understand and work with that community. That being said, in the end, we're an enterprise software company, so we need to keep that balance there. When we think that can be done, we think we can support open source, we think we can contribute to open source, and at the same time be able to make sure customers get solid enterprise class solutions based on that.
Okay. One of your partners, IBM in this case, they recently bought Red Hat, and
yes,
there's also a big Kubernetes product there.
Yeah.
Are you going to work with them closer, or do you think that will compete more, or is there some vision on that?
Yeah, I mean the integration of IBM and Red Hat is still very much in process, so it's hard for me to answer that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that one of our strongest partners over the years has been IBM, and we regularly strike fairly large deals with IBM, right? And that has not slowed down based on their acquisition of Red Hat. So I think that in some ways, the strength of our relationship with IBM will probably help in some ways with our relationship even with Red Hat, right? But at the moment, it's all very, very new. The integration is very much in process, I think, on their side.
Okay. Let me move on to the workspace area for a minute.
Yeah.
At the last two VMworlds in Vegas and in Barcelona, there wasn't much attention in the keynotes for your workspace product.
Yeah.
We have seen some smaller incremental updates. Your colleagues here in the Netherlands gave me an insight on the incremental updates that were there. How big is the focus on the workspace products, and what's the position of Workspace within VMware's portfolio?
Yeah. If you look at the VMware portfolio, actually, you'll see if you look on our website, you'll see we use a phrase, any cloud, any app, any device, right? And the any device place tends to be where Workspace plays. So does some of the IoT type functionality, but Workspace plays up there as well, right? Workspace is a little bit different than most of our other products, though. It is not about delivering a piece of infrastructure for then you to build applications on and so on. It is much more about delivering a secure experience for end users. So, for instance, obviously VMware uses Workspace ONE, as a manager, I've always, I have to approve expenses. I have to be able to. If somebody's moving team or something like that, I need to approve all those. All the list of things you need to do as a manager. And I travel a lot, right? And I make great use of Workspace ONE because of that. It allows me to use my mobile device to access very easily, securely and authenticated into a whole bunch of SaaS applications that we use to do things, HR systems and so on. So it's very much around that experience or that work experience and making sure that happens in a secure fashion. So it's a little bit different from the rest of what we do in that space. It is a key part of our portfolio. And I think your comment about at VMworld about maybe not being showing up as much, I think that's partially just because at the moment we've been emphasizing the hybrid cloud story so strongly that it may have kind of overshadowed in terms of presentations and announcements, etc. But we continue to invest in Workspace ONE. We continue to release new products. We believe is a key and important part of what we see from our customers. And if you look at some of the recent, for our customers, and if you look at some of the recent releases in that space, we're beginning to say, how do I take this Workspace product and not just look at it from the point of view of mobile devices, but also even into things like laptops and so on. So you're beginning to get this unified story across all of those different devices. The bottom line is security is always top of mind, and a lot of our customers leverage Workspace ONE to give them the confidence to say, I'm going to have someone be able to securely access into my infrastructure. And we think it's going to continue to be that. It's a powerful product for us. It's one we're continuing to drive and be very supportive of. I think you're going to see more focus on that or more announcements on that in the future. It's just, the last year we were very hybrid cloud focused.
So maybe in this year's VMworlds we're going to see a bit more then.
I'm never going to talk about what we do at VMware. We always try and make sure that those announcements are surprises.
Okay. So. What do you think about Microsoft becoming active in the workspace market? Because they recently changed their Microsoft 365 subscriptions. Right. They added virtual desktops, and to be honest, I think we all know that they're going to move up a bit and maybe even come with a unified workspace of their own, but they haven't announced yet. But that's in the expectation phase, as I may call it. How do you see that? Is that a good thing that Microsoft comes in, or is it more competition?
We would like to see, to the greatest degree possible, that you're able to have authentication, workspace management type products, or more to the point, user experience across all those products, to be not directly tied to a single operating system in that way. So from our point of view, if you go back to some of my earlier comments about even on the hybrid cloud space and choice, we believe one of our key stories is to be able to offer that choice. We want to be that independent story which gives you then the ability to say, I want to use a Microsoft operating system, or I want to use a Dell laptop, or I want to use a phone from Android, or whatever it is. So you want that flexibility in a unified fashion. And we believe that is where we are going to continue to focus and make sure we're successful in that. Now, we don't quite yet know what Microsoft is going to do in this space. They haven't announced products in this space. But as with anything else, we are pretty good at finding ways to partner with lots of different companies. And we've if you look at some of what we even run on Azure, some of our end user computing technology runs over on Azure. So those relationships are a blend of competition and partnership, and I assume it's going to be something like that. We would just, the key thing is that we hope whatever decisions Microsoft make, that they make sure, they keep the APIs, everything open that is needed for us to be able to offer core solutions for our customers.
Or do you think that if Microsoft steps in the market and they put their marketing machine behind it, that the total market maybe will even grow? So you can benefit from that?
I think it could. I think the market is going to grow anyway, even if Microsoft does not do that, right? Because when I talk to our customers, the demand for this type of technology is very, very high. In fact, one of the things that I see quite a bit of is people ask about this, and then you take out your phone. I had to give up my phone because you're videotaping me here. But and I can take out the phone and show, look how easy it is to do some of these things. And you see it clicking in their mind immediately, saying, oh, I can use this technology for my workforce, which is now more and more mobile. That's not going to suddenly change. So I think the market is going to grow anyway in the space.
Yeah, but it's also the same with the new generation probably, that grew up with Android and iOS and don't know how Windows works.
Yeah.
They probably need a unified workspace to work in the future.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Currently, you're not a leader in the workspace area. Citrix is, and it's a tough competitor.
Yeah, so there's different, when you say the workspace area, there's different components to that. There's VDI, which is virtual desktop infrastructure. Then there's, if you look at something like Workspace ONE, which is all around, which is our product, right? Yeah. Which is all around how do I present a particular experience, even if it's not VDI, right? And in each of those different components, we've got different strengths. Citrix has different strengths, and so on. But we've been growing quite aggressively in this space. I would say that our focus is heavily on that workspace management point of view, and I think that's probably likely to grow. That's where we see the biggest demand.
Okay, so the focus is really on Workspace ONE, and VDI is becoming less important?
I wouldn't say it's less important. I'd just say, right now the focus is on Workspace ONE. And these things go in cycles, actually, is what I notice, right? To your earlier question about the focus on hybrid cloud, as with anything else, we've got a very broad spectrum of products and a portfolio of products. And more and more we're trying to say, rather than speaking of the individual components of the products, how do we look at these as delivering solutions? So if you were to take a list of the VMware products on the hybrid cloud side, you'll see vSAN, you'll see vSphere, you'll see NSX. But all of that is wrapped together in a solution called VCF. That's what runs over on Amazon. That what runs in hyperconverged infrastructure. On the Workspace ONE side, on the end user computing side, it's Workspace ONE is that same wrapper, which wraps all those pieces together. So within that suite, we'll be emphasizing different things at different times. Right now, we're very much emphasizing the security aspects of how do you leverage this to be able to allow people to, access their assets in a very flexible fashion, in a mobile fashion.
Okay. As I mentioned before, besides CTO of VMware, you're also the VP of IoT and Dell Technologies.
Right.
At VMworld Barcelona, it was made clear that VMware is working on support for REM.
Yes.
Can we expect a bigger push on IoT this year then?
So first of all, let me correct one thing there. We actually did a shift internally. Most of the IoT work that I've been doing at Dell Technologies and at VMware, I was managing both teams there. We've moved to a new leader, Bask Iyer. He actually was a VMware person who worked at Dell and has come back a few months ago. Okay. So we're in transition in that. However, I do stay very close to this area. Okay. And so to your core question, yes, we believe that more and more you're going to see a convergence between OT and IT. OT being the factory automation, the building automation, the operations people, and then the IT people who are concerned about things like how do I connect this into my networks? How do I make sure this data is secure? how do I know that I'm compliant from a GDPR and all the other things that I need to be worried about? And we've got obviously a lot of history and a lot of strength on the OT side, on the IT side. What we're seeing is that these edge devices are becoming more and more integrated with the rest of IT, and are also beginning to pose many of the same challenges that we've seen in IT in the past. How do I authenticate this? How do I make sure it's secure from a networking point of view? And we've got, I believe, some unique strengths in that space. With NSX, we're able to stretch the network in a way to be able to secure these devices in a very dynamic fashion. With products like VeloCloud, which is our SD-WAN solution, we're able to deliver solutions right out there at the edge in your different remote offices and so on. With IoT Pulse, which is our product for managing this edge infrastructure, we're able to make sure you can update, patch, and secure these devices, which in some ways is one of the biggest security risks on these devices, the fact that they're difficult to update and patch, and so we're delivering solutions in that space. However, one of the more interesting activities we have going on in this space is, if you think about IoT, you tend to have what I would call extreme edge. It's a robot, it's a group of sensors. And then you might have cloud, where I'm doing AI or something else, or a big data center. But what we're seeing emerging is a compute edge, a kind of a middle edge story, which looks a little bit like hyperconverged infrastructure in some cases, but is distributed, tends to be, in the back of a hotel somewhere, running all these systems at a hotel, or in a factory. It's on the factory floor gathering data from a bunch of sensors, doing some local AI or other activities. That infrastructure, this compute edge, we think is uniquely something that now needs to be managed. I mentioned earlier Project Dimension. One of the challenges you have with that type of infrastructure is typically there aren't a whole bunch of IT people sitting in that, that coffee shop, or in that, even in that manufacturing plant somewhere. So instead you want to know, how do I manage and secure these? I want to be able to do it remotely, and I need to be able to do it at scale. I could have hundreds or thousands of these. And that's where Project Dimension kicks in, the ability to be able to manage those from the cloud. And that's, I think, a new emerging edge story in the mix. I'm sorry.
But the basics is there for all your products. You can deliver an IoT solution. The project you mentioned, you can deliver the hardware on-prem as a service.
Yeah.
But the really big push for IoT is still waiting a bit. When you think the business is ready for the embracing of IoT? Because I think you are ready, or do you think VMware also needs a year or two to really make their products mature? Or
so I think there's two aspects of that. One, and I might be misremembering which analyst, so I won't give the name, right?
Okay.
But one of the analysts recently took a look across the whole IoT market, right? And basically said this market is about a year to 18 months slower than what we thought it would be, right? Mm-hmm. I can't remember what that was, right? And however, they did not change projections of size or scope or anything like that. And basically, their sense is that the promise of IoT is still there, but as you've said, hasn't quite happened as quickly as what people would have thought. And so then one of the questions is, well, why is that, right? And it's actually kind of hard to answer, because I think there's many different factors in it. One of them is you see a lot of people, what I would call doing proof of concepts from an IoT point of view. They're spending time trying to understand, how do I gather data? How do I understand what's going on in my factory? And then what leverage can I make use of that data, and so on. And it's a fairly confusing space. Do I use Google Cloud for my analytics? Do I build my own analytics? Do I do something with Amazon? Do I use VMware to run it locally, and so on? And so there's a lot of those proof of concepts in there. And I think what you're beginning to see is the end of them occurring now, and people now beginning to say, okay, now what do I want to do to be able to move across into some new production level in these spaces. Now, where I do think there are some challenges when we go to do that is the very strength of IoT in some ways is driven by the amount of data that I can get from my systems, right? The challenge is quite often that data is very siloed. So I'll end up with, I've got a whole bunch of data from my, let's say I'm in a hospital, I've got a whole bunch of data from my MRI machines, I've got a whole bunch of separate data coming from, you know, the, I don't know, X-ray systems or something that's in there, and I've got a whole bunch of different data from my asset management systems, right? Many cases coming from different companies, and many cases building a kind of a vertical cloud stack where each of these are then kept independent. Whereas the real power you would get there is if you can say, because I can combine the data with the asset management system and the data with, let's say, the MRI systems, I'm now able to make some unique and value that I can bring from that space. I think that's one of the challenges is going to be having figured out. How are we going to be able to bridge across those different silos? Now, you know, VMware as strength in the data center and in other areas has always been about, in some ways, silo busting or silo bridging, because we try and abstract everything and say, what is our best way to be able to do this? And I think that's where there's an opening opportunity for us in this space. But right now, it is still, you know, it still seems pretty fledgling. And I think, you know, we're going to continue to watch it. We're going to continue to work in this space. We do think it is going to be a big opportunity for VMware. We think, you know, when you think about the industrial effects of this, it's going to be big, but it's definitely a bit slower than I think the industry had expected.
Did Product Dimension move it forward a bit faster? Was that a solution that helped you make the growth a bit faster?
It's a bit interesting that, well, first of all, remember, Dimension is not released. It's only announced at this stage. Just want to be clear. What is interesting in that space, we already have a very significant amount of edge compute infrastructure out there. Like, there's many retail stores which are running VxRail or vSAN or infrastructure where they're consuming data within the store and making decisions and so on based on that. There's ships and trains and, you know, all these different things that you associate with IoT in some way. Already running VMware infrastructure. What Dimension brings into that mix is a new management paradigm for that. And I think that I think it will help accelerate. I think it will help accelerate because the OT people, the people who operate that infrastructure, if I'm running an oil field, I'm an expert on oil. I'm an expert on how to make sure that those pumping stations work correctly. I'm an expert on reacting to problems when there's. I don't want to be dealing with the nuts and bolts of how do I get this thing to talk over a 5G network or whatever it is. That's where VMware can help with that, because we can, with Project Dimension, we can manage that infrastructure for you.
And the step into REM virtualization, do you think that will help accelerate growth? And can we expect it this year maybe, or?
So I'm not going to speak about a product announcement got to do with ARM. You know, we have looked at ARM particularly in the context of virtualization because we had requests coming in from customers, particularly actually somewhere on the automotive front, where if you look at a particular vehicle today, you'll find there's a lot of separate pieces of separate systems in there, each of them leveraging their own compute infrastructure. And so one of the questions was, can they leverage a hypervisor to be able to give them secure isolation, but on less CPUs, essentially classic virtualization, but virtualization which is highly isolated from one application to the next. And that's what attracted us and moved us into ARM. Now, what is interesting there is you're also seeing Amazon recently speaking of ARM products as well. So there is a little bit of an emergence of our discussions around ARM. But let's face it, the vast majority of our business today is IT infrastructure and related, and the vast majority of that, like to some enormous percentage, is x86, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
You don't think that IoT will be more REM than x86?
I do think in the very particular case of IoT, not alone will it be, it already is. There's a lot of infrastructure out there which is ARM-based. Yeah. There's a lot of gateways which are ARM-based out there as well.
Okay. VMware has been around for many years, and that means they also have some legacy. There's now a big push on automation and simplicity in the whole IT market. companies want to invest less in managing infrastructure. They want it to be more autonomous.
Yeah.
Because there are not enough IT workers, or managing infrastructure with workers is too expensive nowadays. We've seen some approaches at VMware to do more automation and deploying in one click, for example.
Yeah.
What's the vision of VMware for automation in their products?
There's really three stories there. One of them is, which you see with products like VMC and AWS, that says, we will take care of this for you, right? Meaning that if you're saying, I don't want to deal with the management of this infrastructure, VMware will say, run on this infrastructure or in this product line, and we will manage the infrastructure for you. And you see that emerging across not just VMC and AWS, but even some of the products we have around monitoring, logging, security, where these are being delivered as SaaS solutions in some way. And so because of that, one way of achieving this goal of meeting this requirement that says, I don't want to manage my infrastructure, it's VMware will do that. But by the way, what's really driving that goal in some way is, as companies digitally transform, there's a massive competitive pressure on them to be able to work with customers, be able to engage with customers better than the competition. And they need to put all of their focus on that. So they need to put their application developers focusing on building a better application, building a better consumer experience, not figuring out, do I connect, some storage and networking devices together. So that's what's driving this. So one part is we manage it. The other one, which we spoke a little bit about earlier, is HCI. HCI in some ways is a response to that, because it says, rather than you customer integrating different pieces together in some way, leverage those solutions which already are built to play very well together. So if I look at something like VMware Cloud Foundation, it already includes networking, storage, vSphere, management components to that. Update, you mentioned the one-click update, it's part of that. All of that is already integrated in a fashion that says, okay, this is now much easier because someone else has done the work for me, someone else being VMware in that particular case. And then I think the third area, which is more future-looking, is you're going to hear a lot about things like AI and machine learning and so on. And to us, a lot of our customers are building those applications on top of our infrastructure. But what we're looking at is, how do we leverage those technologies within our infrastructure itself? And it's actually surprising how much machine learning is in some of the systems that people don't even realize right now. When you look at something like Wavefront, which is our product for how do I monitor and get lots of metrics information quickly out of some data center infrastructure, those things leverage these new technologies. But what we believe is, and what we're working hard on is, we believe you're going to get into a model which is something like a self-driving or an autonomous data center to some degree, by where the decisions that you may have had to make as an operator will now be made for you by intelligent agents in the infrastructure itself. Now, I put a little caveat on that, right? And the caveat is, in our experience in the past, when we put in functionality like this, is the initial releases we did of these, they tended to be advisory. So we would say to a customer, we think you'd get better performance if you did X, and they would make the decision then and say, okay, I will do that. Probably the strongest example of that is a technology called DRS, which has been in VMware's software for ages. It's a resource management, basically. Initially, it was advisory. Now, everybody just leaves it on. And it moves VMs around a little bit based on performance or workload or failures of a system. But now people just trust it. I think the same is going to probably occur with these new autonomous data centers. Initially, it will tend to be advisory, but then people will begin to trust them more and more as they begin to make decisions for the infrastructure. We have seen examples of where, by monitoring, learning, and applying AI to workloads running on pretty large infrastructure, that we can learn how to optimize the infrastructure to give 3-4 times performance in certain areas, right? Maybe storage latency and so on in those spaces. So we think there's real value to this, and we think this is going to happen. We're putting quite a bit of effort into that. So I think ultimately the answer will be the infrastructure itself intrinsically will
be autonomous.
Will be autonomous, and I think actually the one thing that people don't always jump on there is I think the security of the infrastructure more and more will leverage those type of technologies as well, because the complexity is so high that you need technologies like this to be able to constantly monitor and make sure that the infrastructure is secure.
How many VMware experts do you need in the future then, if everything is going to be autonomous? You need a few.
You need a few. I think when you say VMware experts, you're probably referring to our certification programs in that space, which is a very popular program. We have a lot of people who really spend a lot of time wanting to become VMware certified in that way. I think what happens there is the role will just change. It's more around how do I get to leverage these new technologies in clever ways. What you're also going to see, I think, is the developer role and the IT role is starting to blend as you begin to get into everything from delivery of SaaS, CI/CD, and so on. And so that's where the focus is going to be.
Okay.
And so it's going to shift a little bit.
I want to move into one subject before we wrap up.
Yeah.
That's simplicity into your products, because that's the other trend in the market that we need to cover. We've seen the new HTML5 interface at vSphere around 2 years ago, I believe. Some new improvements were announced on that as well. Do you think that will be the trend on all your products to make it more simple and easy to use?
Yeah, in most cases, simplicity is achieved by operating at more of a solution level than individual products. So when we look at something like, again, VCF, the goal there is to give you that unified approach across the software-defined data center, which itself then simplifies, because you don't get into the questions of how do I tweak the storage or something, right? Instead, it's more around, I want to deploy the following workloads, what's the best way to do that, which itself is inherently simplified. So yeah, I think you're going to continue to see that. I would comment a little bit there though, because the implication is that the VMware products are difficult to use or are not simple in this way, right? Where most of that tends to come from is people leverage VMware products to build deeply integrated and complex subsystems, right? And we give them a lot of technologies to do that and a lot of ways to do that. And, they get to build some fantastic infrastructure because of this. Infrastructure is resilient, can automatically fail over, all of these sort of things. What we're doing in many cases now, though, is saying we will give you a reference design, or we will give you a canned model that says this is the best way for you to do this. Yes, if you want to do all the tweaking and you want to dive in, yeah, we're probably going to keep that for you so you can do that, because it gives you, the customer, that flexibility. But more and more, I think customers are saying, I actually trust you to take care of this for me. And you actually see that when they move to public cloud. They don't really know what's going on under the hood.
You have two options. One is you can configure everything on your own.
Correct.
And set it up and build it how you like it, and then you have many possibilities, and it's not very simple to use. You really need the VMware training that you spoke of earlier.
Correct.
And the other end is that you have a reference design and you give them an environment that works perfectly, that you have designed, and that's easy and simple to use.
Correct. And you see that trend. You see it in HCI, you see it as you move to the cloud. So you begin to see this trend very much appearing there.
The other question is, you have many products.
Yes.
I made some cards with your products, so I could look back to know where I was talking about. But you have some products that do look alike a lot, because one is for on-prem, the other is for cloud. If we look at simplicity, sometimes it's also better to combine some products, or maybe make a decision to stop with a product. That's also. Do you think your product catalog will also be a bit simplified in the future, or?
Yeah, the visibility you see into the individual products, you see this massive list, right? But in practice, more and more, what you see us emphasizing is VCF or is VMC on AWS, right? Which basically, they become the effective product, right? The reason, however, why the individual products do not completely disappear, we have customer bases which range from like the biggest banks in the world to like a small dentist office somewhere, right? With all of the requirements in between about how people want to be able to figure out how do I build infrastructure to match their particular needs. And so there's a lot of usage of some of the individual products in the mix, right? But more and more, and you're already seeing this, if you're at the last VMworld, and you'll see in the future, there is an emphasis on just buy the solution, focus on the solution, as opposed to the individual products themselves. And that would be VCF and Workspace ONE on the end user computing side, or when you get into some of the multi-cloud management, things like our cloud services, where you've got things like cloud health and so on in that mix.
So if you do offers to companies, you also combine all those products like VCF and you give them a quote. They don't have to go to the whole list and pick everything together. It's just bundled as is.
Correct. In the end, we will do what our customers want us to do.
Yes,
we will work with the customer, right? But in many cases, yes, it is simpler to be able to say, hey, here's the solution. How do I leverage the solution?
Yeah, because if they look at one product and you need additional models, it gets difficult very fast.
Correct, yes, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for this in-depth interview of VMware. I hope that you enjoyed the interview.
Yes, it was good, thank you. I hope I didn't talk too much.
We hope to have the next CEO or CTO here very, very soon. If you're watching and you're interested, please give us an email because we really like to talk to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe see you at the next convention.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.